I'm Scott Moore, and I'm a performance engineer. I help to make software and applications faster, better, more resilient. Lately, there's one thing on my mind.
Where's the best barbecue at, man?
So I'm going across the country, talking about performance engineering and barbecue. Join me as we take the performance tour.
Man, I gotta say, I'm really stoked. This is the first episode of the Performance Tour. We're headed to Orlando. And this may not be the most technical thing to talk about first thing, but I want to talk about the roles, the titles, the jobs, and the skill sets that make up those roles in performance testing and engineering today. What are they? I see the landscape changing. I mean, we've got our traditional roles of performance testers and engineers, maybe architects. I've seen them most times come out of QA, right? Sometimes it's a separate person within a QA team. Oh, they're the performance tester. Or they're a shared role. Hey, this person does automation as a whole. So since they do functional automation, they can do performance automation. And I've seen that with various degrees of success. Then we have the performance architect, or a team of performance engineers. They're systems engineers, and they're people who have experience with both tuning infrastructure as well as automation skill sets. And now we have agile development methodology, and we have the role of the SDET, a software development engineer in test, a role that came out of Microsoft several years ago to fill a need that they had. And the purpose of an SDET was to have someone who had the heart of a tester, but could sit right alongside the developers developing code that was testing their software at the same time. So they could look at the code level and code with them, do reviews, make the code as performant as possible, and help release high-performing software, which is a great idea. With DevOps, we now have this role of the site reliability engineer, something that came out of Google. Idea being, let's get somebody who is a both find it and fix it person. So this is a person who can spend 50% of their time writing code, 50% of their time in operations, deploying code, deploying applications, doing triage. So if there is a problem, they can not only find the problem, and then they got to write a new patch to fix it. They could probably do it. Now, how much of that they actually do, being 50-50, you hear things, you don't know if it's true or not, right? So I want to find out what the market is saying, and this is why we're stopping in Orlando. I know one of the best places to check with is Tech Systems. Here at Tech Systems, and we're in Orlando. This is the first episode of the Performance Tour, and this is probably the best place to start if you're wanting to think about careers in performance engineering or performance testing. This is a great place to start that conversation. So I'm here with Monica Brown and Nick Owens. Why don't you guys tell me a little bit about yourself before we begin?
So my name is Monica Brown. I've been with Tech Systems just shy of 5 years, and I specifically specialize within the quality assurance and SDET space, both on a local level as well as a national level.
My name is Nick Owens. I've been with Tech Systems for about 2 years now. I specify within the DevOps and SRE skill set, mainly from not only a local level in Orlando, but also just the state of Florida as a whole.
You know, I have two qualifications for performance type roles. I have the traditional classification, which typically comes out of QA. You got your performance tester, your engineer, your architect, or a team. Then you've got DevOps and Agile software development, where you have SDETs and SREs, and I'm hearing more and more about those roles being a big need for that. And those have performance task in them as well. So can you tell me the difference in demand that you're seeing today, companies asking for those traditional roles versus the new roles?
I know specifically within the performance engineer versus SDET space, the SDET space is, I would say, substantially in a much higher demand than the performance engineering space. Today's job descriptions and what managers are looking for is somebody who has knowledge in performance and has done performance, but not to the point where they are specifically looking for a performance engineer. Today they are looking for somebody who's a combination of performance, framework development, automation, and most importantly, from scratch with object-oriented languages tied behind that for the automation portion.
So when you hear about a need in a company, what are the skills that people are asking for? Is it very specific or is it general?
A lot of what I see, number one, first and foremost, is automation, particularly automating through scripting languages when it's on the Unix, Linux, open source side of things like Python, when it's on Windows, PowerShell, Bash, Perl. Config management has made a huge play into implementing a lot of those automation of deployment. So the number one config management tool I'm seeing is Terraform. We see a lot of Chef, Ansible somewhat, Puppet's almost non-existent right now for me. And then on top of that, there's been a huge push for containerization of environments, using Kubernetes orchestration to deploy into Docker containers. And honestly, it's pretty much the same for SRE.
Well, what about fraud? And here's the reason I asked that. I've got a buddy who's also a performance engineer. He once received his own resume from a candidate. The only thing that was changed was the name. Everything else was the same. And that was an interesting interview. Right? So sometimes I'm asked to vet candidates for companies, right? And you can kind of tell if they know their stuff or if they're just kind of but sometimes you can't. You know, how prevalent is that in your industry? Do you see that, especially in this realm when we get highly technical? I've heard it's as much as 90%. I mean, is that right?
I would say that in speaking with our managers, over 80% of them are at least finding falsifications. From my perspective as a recruiter, I have in-depth questions that I've learned to ask to better understand if somebody's a good fit. I meet with every single person that I consider before I even think about sending their information to the hiring manager, and I make sure to ask them some more of those technical questions. We see the bait and switch often, but we try to mitigate that by making sure we're meeting the people in advance. I know with some of our managers, we've gone as far as, hey, when we meet with them, if I meet with somebody via Skype or FaceTime, I'll take a picture of what they look like during that, and then we'll send that to the hiring manager along with their marketing portfolio so that they know, hey, we've already vetted them, we've had them technically screened by somebody who's at a senior level, and here's a picture of them so that when you're meeting with them, it looks the same.
So we've seen this huge rise in agile development methodology. We've seen the rise of the DevOps engineers, and we've seen the landscape within IT changing very fast. So question for you, should performance in either of these be separated, where there's always a single person that we point to that's the performance resource, or is it everybody's got to be a performance engineer now?
So personally, I would say, and obviously this is more opinion based, but I feel like it should continue to stay as a performance engineer is the performance engineer, and they are the sole performance engineer on the team. Maybe there's 1, 2, up to 3 on a team, depending on the size of the enterprise and what you guys are doing. But I think everybody knowing everything isn't realistic, and you won't be able to meet the high level of performance that you might be going for if everybody's a generalist versus having subject matter experts within each dynamic of what the team is trying to accomplish.
Let's say somebody watches this episode and they go, performance sounds like it could be a cool thing, or I want to be in one of these roles. What's going to make them a great candidate? What should they start studying or working towards, or what kind of skill sets would you like to see to make them an awesome candidate?
Hands-on experience is going to be the number one thing. So if you're currently working, even if it's not your job, I highly recommend finding out who's the automation person, who's the SDET. Say, hey, do you have an hour a week to sit down with me, show me what you're doing, maybe take on some courses online, whether you're using Udemy. There's so many different places out there today that you can start educating yourself, but then taking what you're doing from an education standpoint and implementing it while you're in the job.
So one of the things that I started looking at was the site reliability engineer themselves. What makes up that role? And one of the places I actually found some information was from Catchpoint, my sponsor of the show, and I chose this title before I ever had a sponsor. But for the last couple of years, Catchpoint has been putting out some questionnaires to try to get some feedback from the market on what is the role of a site reliability engineer in this particular company. How asking companies, if you have a site reliability engineer or a team of SREs, what do they do? How do they operate? What are the things that is their day in the life? And they asked a lot of probing questions, and they came out with some interesting results. There's a 2020 version of this that will be coming out this year, and we'll be sharing that information on the Performance Tour when it's available. But the 2019 version is still out there, and I read it, and it's got some pretty interesting facts out there. So Nick, if I want to be an SRE, what's 3 things that you could tell me that I can do to be an SRE as fast as possible?
Well, number one, you got to find out which companies are actually hiring for SREs. After that, it's good to go to conventions, conferences, get to understand the technologies, the people doing this job, and that's a good baseline to start out with.
Got it. Go to conferences. I can do that.
Number 2, you got to learn about the DevOps culture. You got to get to know the ins and outs of it, the people who are doing this job day to day.
Understand the culture. Yeah, I think I can do that too. I'm in.
And finally, you got to be prepared for some long hours. SREs have to do a lot, they have to know a lot, and that's just the beginning of all the work that they're putting into this job.
Long hours, can't pay too much attention to my hygiene. I can do this. I'm gonna be an SRE. Well, thanks guys for doing this, and thanks for being here. And if you want to know more about what Tech Systems can do to help you, you can contact them with the information that you're seeing on your screen right now. Monica and Nick, thanks. And
Thank you for having us.
Appreciate it. All right, we're here at Bubbalous Barbecue, and I am with
Brian Billingsley.
Tell me a little bit about yourself, Brian.
Sure. I'm currently a performance engineer with Tech Systems Global Services. Currently working with the Legis Group on some internal projects. Prior to that was at Universal Studios as the lead performance engineer.
Awesome. So I'm also with
Dustin Hogan.
Okay, Dustin, tell me about you.
So currently I'm working under Tech Systems as a contractor for Disney. I'm working as a mixed role of SDET, senior software developer, and site reliability engineer.
I want to get both of you to tell me your opinion on where we stand in IT today in regards to the traditional performance tester role versus doing performance stuff as a site reliability engineer. Now this is my opinion. I believe performance is a niche skill set, and it's a black art all of its own, right? So to get really good at anything, you got to dive deep, and that's what you got to do. So that's what I've always done. What I sense is with agile development, hey, we're a member of a Scrum team. Everybody on the Scrum team needs to do performance. If I'm a site reliability engineer in DevOps, everybody needs to be able to build and support resilient performance, code to deployment. You agree or disagree that that's the mentality today?
Definitely, definitely with the new Agile Scrum mentality, you need everybody to be able to fire on at least partial cylinders, like some cross training, those kind of things. I think just so that because you always have one person that is either ahead or pulling behind the others, or needing help. Maybe they're holding up rest of the sprint, those kind of things, and those are the times you kind of like swarm.
So having said that, if we agree that that's where everything's going, how's that working out? Because I just saw what happened at Black Friday back at Christmas, and it's 2020. So why are we still having outages if this plan is working?
Well, I don't think performance is the priority like it used to be for one thing. I think it is a lower priority in some companies, and some companies it is a higher priority. I think depending on where that mentality is, that helps determine where your outcomes are on Black Friday for one. But and it's not the traditional, we're just going to hammer this thing with a performance test. It's also being adaptive to understand we need to start looking at the logs, doing more analytics. I mean, there's a lot more to this than there used to be of just hammering a website, trying to figure out where it breaks, and and determine what's broken. I think now we have to be proactive and shift left. That's kind of been the mentality.
So last question, what would you guys, one thing that you would like to see change in the industry that would make your life easier in whatever role that you're doing?
From my experience over the years, I think for me it's always been critical that there's the buy-in with whoever you're working for, either as a consultant or an employee, is do they actually believe in, for me, do they believe in the outcome of good performance engineering? Do we really take it serious, and are we going to look at this stuff when we know there's a problem instead of pushing it to the side and saying we'll worry about it on the next release, and then it's always the next release and the next release and the next release. And I think also, we have to be adaptive to change, and I think that's another key thing about our industry is, we can't be stuck in the past. I mean, as ideal as it was, performance engineers at one point were kind of, they were the cowboys. We kind of stood out as, that's changed. We're not that way anymore. Everybody kind of carries the weight across the board. So anyhow, I think it just comes down, from my perspective, is that companies really have to believe that the value we bring, whether it be performance testing, performance analysis, whatever it is, that we bring value to the table, and they take it serious, because I don't think a lot of companies take it serious. They keep pushing out the code, and they're great about DevOps and they're great about Agile, but they still don't engage on what really the impact of looking at the performance of your application. So I think that's the buy-in there is important.
So for me, I think it's more like, I don't have a different opinion, but I do want to build on what he said, is just the buy-in for where we use performance metrics, where we use reliability metrics, where we use all these things. Is I think that one of the things that really has to shift is we need to put a real emphasis on tracking these things. A lot of these folks are trying to get each of the middle managers and the executives are under their own sort of pressure to deliver something and show value for their team so they can continue to get a budget and move on. And I understand that that's kind of above my pay grade and business oriented. But what happens is, we're not taking the time to say, okay, well, that's what your driver is, money and showing cost and benefit analysis. And I think that one of the things that can majorly shift this is starting to track from the perspective of, where do we lose our clients? We have a client that comes to our page. We have these things like conversation IDs and things like that. So if we could really start tracking, hey, every time that your page fails, here's a missed business opportunity, here's something that you're losing out on, then we start getting those data points to argue back and push back and go, you know what, yeah, you did get this page out on time, but look how many potential customers we lost this month by not doing quality, by not focusing on performance, by not doing the right things. So that's the shift that I would really like to see in the industry, is just more of that, developers thinking smart about how you can push back on this almost toxic release focus schedule.
Cool. Okay, guys, let's go get some barbecue, man.
My name is Todd Merchant. We are at Bubbalous Barbeque in Orlando, Florida. It is a mom and pop establishment. It opened 27 years ago. We have 5 stores all in Orlando. We still have the same baked bean recipe. Some of the traditions are still holding. We are best known for our pork. We do a decent brisket as well, but we do spare rib, baby back rib, and our number one seller is pulled pork.
Well, we all know that the SRE is an emerging thing. I mean, it came out of Google, and Google's been doing it longer than anybody because they started it. But now that it's being adopted industry-wide, it's probably less than 3 years old, and it's so new that there really isn't a whole lot of definition around it. We do know that they're doing a lot of triage, and I've experienced that. So one of the things that was brought up with the report was, A, it's emerging, B, it's usually teams of a couple, 2 or 3, or less than 10 at the most. One of the things that brings out that stress is not being able to find out where a problem spot is at. What's causing this outage? What's causing this performance problem? So Catchpoint, from the start, has put points of presence in not only just the tier 2 providers, but they've actually went to the backbone providers and put a monitoring their monitoring software in place there all along the way. So in Verizon, in a Comcast, a Rackspace, all the way to the edge, and they combine that synthetic monitoring all along the various tiers where the packets are going, not just from AWS, not just from the cloud providers, all the way to the edge, and adding RUM to the mix, adding JavaScript to specific pages customers are coming from, they're accessing. So you mix the two together and you get this complete picture. And site reliability engineering is, a lot of it is about that triage that happens, trying to find out where those bottlenecks are at. So I would highly suggest you read this report. It doesn't take very long, and it's not a lot of detailed writing. There's a lot of cool graphics in it that actually show you what they're seeing in the industry. If you're interested in knowing more about how the SRE feels in their organization, what kind of things that they're running across, and what kind of things they're doing day to day, Catchpoint's got this great report on that. So I wanted to bring that up.